So Jack hasn't played it. Dave, I presume you've not touched it. So I'm guessing
Jesus,
it's
I don't mind spoilers because I feel like I've heard a lot of them, and a lot of what I've heard is not particularly complimentary.
All right. So where do you want to start with this, Garrett? Because I know you have takes. I have takes as well. You're obviously, of the two of us, much more kind of in tune with. You've played like the modern Final Fantasies as well, right? Right. So this is kind of, I guess, like new territory for me, because outside of the FF7 remake, I've never played like a modern Final Fantasy. So some things that might seem weird for me are probably just like, this is just how modern Final Fantasy games are now. And it was interesting seeing that Platinum Games announced that they actually have been working in conjunction with this. But I find it bizarre because I find the combat in this thing to be really fucking limited.
Well, yeah, because there's a skill tree and there's more stuff to learn. So you wonder, does it get more? But it feels a little stiff. I play it, it's like it doesn't feel terrible, but it's a little on the wrong side of stiff. And there's been like a bunch of, very high praise I've seen people from this demo, and I'm like, really? like the main thing is like the story is embarrassing. It is embarrassingly derivative of Game of Thrones. I'm sorry. Like there's a level of,
I mean, I never watched Game of Thrones, so I can't speak for that. So I'll leave that to you.
There's like a level of like homage and playing off a popular thing, and then there's a level of this is just Winterfell and the character has a wolf. I'm just like, guys, you can't be that derivative of Game of Thrones. You just can't be. And there's a bunch of like sex and politics stuff. They're just doing Game of Thrones, and like there's some of their own stuff. There's like espers or eidolons or whatever they're calling them in this game, like the summons. There's a bunch of that stuff. There's a bunch of like Final Fantasy stuff and chocobos, but like the core of it is just so ripping off Game of Thrones to a level that I legitimately think it's embarrassing. I cannot believe it is this derivative.
Wow.
I've got a couple of issues, not so much in terms of the kind of Game of Thrones knockoff part of it, because again, I haven't watched that, so I don't really care for that. I've got some issues around, like, I think the pacing of these 2.5 hours is pretty dire.
A lot of cutscenes.
Just in terms of, but it's not even just that, and I'm having this issue with Metal Gear Solid 2 for like the first 2 hours of it I played, is where you get like 10 minutes of cutscenes, and then you like have like 10 to 15 seconds of gameplay where you go from point A to
They're
point
like,
B.
open a door, and then more cutscenes. And they make you do an annoying thing with doors in this game where it's like, press X to open the door and then hold R2 to push the door. It's like, why are you making me do this?
This is not interactive. And it's just like, I would rather you just didn't do that fucking 10 seconds of gameplay and then just bolted on a couple of extra minutes of cutscene, do whatever the fuck that you needed to do, and then just get me to the point where I'm actually doing something. Because it's like a solid hour into the game before you actually do anything that feels substantial in the way of gameplay. But even then, it drops in cutscenes every fucking like 3 minutes or so.
It's very choppy. It's just, as you said, they finally get to an area where they're like, go explore this area and find a boss, fight a boss. And as you said, it's still every 2 or 3 minutes you're being cut off by a cutscene. It's just like, let me play the game. Just let me play the game.
And it feels so like linear in like, and maybe it's, part of the knock-on effects of playing fucking stuff like Elden Ring or Tears of the Kingdom, but it's just that kind of modern corridor, like linear approach where, it gives you the illusion that this is kind of a big world to explore, but there's really there's one path, and you have to kind of jump over this thing here, and you have to, there's a ledge here, and you go up, and then the X icon appears so you can climb up there. And it's just, there's so much of that kind of like modern game design conventions shit that's just pissing me off.
Yeah, and back to the cutscenes for a second. One of the it's one of the fatal sins games can do for me. Cutscenes have QuickTime events. And I'm not like anti QuickTime events, but if you're going to say sit and watch this 20-minute cutscene, and at a random interval we'll put one QuickTime event that if you fail you go back to the start, I'm like, no, just no. I'm okay watching your cutscene. You don't have to force false interactivity on me.
Yeah. But with all of that, I wouldn't say that I completely hated my time with this thing.
It's not like diabolical.
No, I mean,
it's only embarrassing, not diabolical.
The production levels of it looks spectacular. I think that the fight sequence that with the last kind of boss fight that you have, I think is like generally fucking spectacular. So, surprise, surprise, Final Fantasy has good music. And I did get to the end of it, and I was like, I probably will like play this thing. And I think the two boss fights that it has, what the fuck is the plot thing?
They don't call it that, but it's the famous Final Fantasy enemy.
Yeah.
They don't call it the
They call it
Marlboro.
some weird
Why
word
not?
that's not that.
Like Morbill,
Something like
or
that, yeah.
that.
Why are they doing that? Why rename a Marlboro?
It's the same
what's
with
point?
again, they have 17 different words for summons, whether it's espers or eidolons or
Yeah. But that's kind of always been the theme, right? But every game, Final Fantasy game, a Marlboro's been a Marlboro for as long as I can remember.
maybe it's just a baby Marlboro, and that's why it has a different name.
There we go. Maybe
like
there'll be a bigger one later on. Yeah. I think I could see, as I was with the combat, I could see how I see the potential for how this will expand later
When you have more
on
options than
as you
magic
pick up
or
more
attack.
abilities. Yeah, but certainly for like the first kind of 2 boss fights, it's just you dodge and you swipe and you can hold L2 and then do a special move and then you wait for that to charge back up
But,
again.
How important is dodging?
It's you can go without doing it, I think. Like, you can just walk around the character and avoid attacks that way, but when you do like the classic perfect dodge thing, time slows down and you can counterattack, so like you gain a big advantage from dodging.
When did this become just every game combat? It's like, oh,
Dark Souls.
you just have to. I just don't.
Well, yeah, the
fuck
thing
off.
this is
I
it's
don't
already
want
there.
it.
It's DMC.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. I guess DMC.
It's doing DMC, and again, you mentioned the platinum influence, which makes sense there. Like, they're doing character action here as opposed to
I was thinking in my head as you were describing it as a Platinum Games thing.
like they're doing character action, and like that's you were talking earlier about, like, you know, how do you feel about modern Final Fantasy games? That's the problem. There's no such thing. Like, there's not, like, up until 10 there's an idea of what Final Fantasy was, and then every game after that is just different, and this is the same. It's like, it's completely different, and it's a completely different like genre of action, and none of them are the same anymore. So you get, it's kind of like just a crapshoot for like what the hell this game's even going to be. And as you said, like, the combat feels pretty limited, but you get, like, you dive into the skill tree and it's like, oh, you can like jump up off on somebody and you can do a recovery dodge, and you can do like an attack that closes distance, and like, I'm interested to see when you actually get to playing the actual game, does that get more deep, and do you have more options, and is it more fun? I think it is the pacing that kills this particular like vertical slice of the game, that it's just cutscene, small bit of interactivity that's meaningless, cutscene, a little bit of like an action section that is still broken up by cutscenes, and a couple boss fights, one of which is like a big cinematic 2 summons fighting boss fight, which is pretty cool. But again, I'm interested to see, is that like varied and interesting, or are you just pressing one button and dodging the entire time like you kind of are at this one?
That fucking whole summons thing, it's like just being on a roller coaster, and it's like a bad, or not even a bad, but just like a really redundant, not like a first. Oh God, what's the genre? The sort of top-down 2D
Shmup.
like shmup. Yeah, it felt like that. It just felt like a kind of over-the-shoulder 3D shmup sort of thing, but just even less interesting, because you're just kind of moving the cursor around, trying to lock onto the
You just bash the
summon
attack button.
and then firing away, and every now and again you dodge, and it just is like, again, visually, yeah, this all looks spectacular and there are explosions and whatnot, but it's like, there's no engagement with this. There's no, and maybe because, you know, I don't have the sort of emotional connection to Final Fantasy, maybe there's something there that's missing with me, but I found the whole thing to just be more tedious than anything.
It's the first one in the game, so it's the one that we're like, oh, here's how this thing works. So again, maybe the ones later will have a much greater degree of interactivity, and you're actually moving around spaces in what feels like an actual meaningful interactive way. I think like that word I've come back to, like, interactive, a couple times. It's like, it's just not interactive enough. It just doesn't feel interactive enough for a video game. But like, it's a Final Fantasy game, I'll play it. Like, some of the story stuff seems interesting when you strip away the Game of Thrones nonsense, with the stuff that they're doing below the veneer of, we are just doing Game of Thrones, we're literally just doing Game of Thrones. Like, it's not a good first impression for me, but listen, it's the first 2 hours of a game, and maybe when they actually throw you into it to let you actually play it, like, for a sustained period of time, because I think the longest you'll have your hand on the controller without a cutscene in this demo is like 6 minutes. So
but I will say this, I like the main character, and I didn't hate the voice acting, so, you know, for me, that's something.
Wonders never cease.